Hi, thanks for watching today's Drawing for Adults class brought to you by the Ann Arbor District Library and the Ann Arbor Art Center. Today we are going to be painting watercolor and ink lakeside landscapes. So if you aren't familiar with Pigma Micron ink pens, I highly recommend that brand or some other kind of waterproof archival type of ink pen. The great thing about Pigma Micron pens is they come in a variety of sizes, so you're not limited to just one Sharpie ink or something like that kind of small, fine tip. You can use a couple different sizes, and you can buy them individually at art supply stores, but you can also buy a nice variety set as well. So I do recommend the Pigma Micron ink pens for this project because you can you can draw after you have painted with watercolors, as well as paint after you have drawn with the ink pens, and so you can you don't have to worry about it bleeding because they are waterproof, which is really a huge bonus. And then for watercolors, if you aren't familiar with watercolors, any kind of set will work, whether it's in a pan or it is out of the tubes. Just make sure if it's out of the tubes that you're adding plenty of water. We're going to be using thin washes, so you've been able to see kind of a brief little preview of what this will look like and the process here as I've just been describing it. I'll go into more detail, of course, as a step-by-step, but with watercolor you have what's called wet on dry and wet on wet. Wet on wet is where you are putting wet paint on wet paper. So that could be that you've just taken a clean brush and brushed on some water onto your paper, and you're painting on top of that and letting the paint just kind of bleed a little bit intentionally. Or you could do that same process but with a little bit of color. And then wet on dry is simply putting wet paint on dry paper for a little bit more of a crisper brush stroke. So let's go through this process of this painting. It is helpful if you're starting with a watercolor paper. It has a more textured surface to work with, and from there what you can do is start by laying down just a light wash. So you can see here how I have just put a thin layer of watercolor paint on the paper, and what I've done is just kept it very, very light and thin. It's not highly concentrated or saturated. It is a thin application of paint. Now, I don't intend on adding a lot of detail here with my watercolors, so you can see I've laid down some trees. I'm putting a little bit of shading in there and some streaks. I'm keeping this very loose. I'm not going to add too much detail here with my brushwork with watercolors. I will come back in after I have inked it. Now, with all of these layers that you're seeing, you do want to wait for them to dry between layers. For best results, wait 20 minutes or so, maybe, just to let your paint dry. And especially before you start coming in here with your ink pen, you absolutely need it to be dry, or you're going to probably ruin your ink pen. If you just bought that pen, you'd be probably kind of sad. So don't do that. Take care of your art supplies. Make sure your paper is just as dry as it was before you started painting. Now, you can see here I am using a variety of lines, which means that I have a various weight going with my line. So I have some areas that are thicker and some areas that are thinner, and then every weight in between. So I want to have some thick lines, some thin lines, and then I'm also agitating my pen. So what that means is I'm intentionally shaking my hand a little bit. I'm loosening up. I'm not worrying about a super crisp line. I'm letting it be really loose and scribbly and wiggly. And now what I'm doing is I'm coming back in with my brush, and note that of course this is digital, so you're seeing a little bit of a different version, so I'm trying to do my best to make it look as realistic to watercolor, like actual watercolor on paper, as I can, but there will be of course some differences that you'll see. So now I'm adding in just a little bit more color to help accent it with watercolors after I've inked it. And this step is optional, of course. I just wanted to create a little extra mood in my painting, so I decided to add an extra layer of paint. So I hope you've enjoyed today's watercolor and ink lakeside landscapes.